In our last lesson, we had Israel on the banks of the promised land. They were ready to go in and conquer what God had promised to Abraham. They sent 12 spies, and they all came back with a single report. God has told us the truth. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. It is a land that will sustain all of our great people. It's just as God had said. It's that kind of land. But we can't take it because there are giants in the land. They said it is as God said, but God won't do what He said. God had said, this is the way the land will be, and I will give it to you. They believed what their eyes could see about what God had promised, but they did not believe what they could not see. Therefore, they did not believe at all. For faith is being sure about what you do not see and confident about what you have not received. Two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, had faith. They said, let's go take the land. The people refused to listen to them, so God said, all right, you will not take the land. For 38 more years you'll wander in this wilderness. The shoes will not grow old on your feet, nor the clothes on your back, and I'll feed you. But you'll not inherit the land that I promised Abraham, because that's only for those who have faith. They tried to take the land and were defeated. So they began to wander. Now you'll read of those 12 unknown stations, not unknown by name because they're listed, but unknown by where they are, in Numbers 15 through 19, and also chapter 33, which will be a summary of that. 5 things occurred during that period of time. It's very important for us to remember, because these not only explain what's happening, but they tell us what is going to happen with the people of God. In chapter 15, there are ordinances given concerning worship, certain sacrifices, certain ordinances that they are to follow during this time of wandering and also after they enter the promised land. So God begins to use these 38 years for schooling, as He schools them on the way that they're to worship Him when they get into the land. That's not for any of those over 20 when they left Egypt. That's for all of their children that will inherit promised land. But turn to Numbers 16. Let's take a look at the second incident during this period of wandering, and it's rebellion. First of all, we had ordinances for worship. Now we've got rebellion. The rebellion of Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and On. Read it with me. It's very interesting and very informative concerning God's character and God's will for His people. Numbers 16, beginning with verse 1. Rebellion. Korah, son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, became insolent against Moses and rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who'd been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron. Here is a move for authority. And they said to Moses and Aaron, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord's with them. Why then do you set yourself above the Lord's assembly? Anytime that God's ordained leaders are questioned like this, the questioners are in trouble. Moses and Aaron have not set themselves up as rulers. God has chosen them. God has appointed them for leaders. These 254 guys, they may be leaders, they may be community leaders, but they're not leaders of faith. When Moses heard this, he fell face down. He knows there's trouble. He said to Korah and all his followers, in the morning the Lord will show who belongs to Him and who is holy, and He will have that person come near Him. The man He chooses, He will come near him. You, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take censers, and tomorrow put fire and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who's holy. You Levites have gone too far. Most of the people there are Levitical people, jealous that Aaron is high priest, and jealous that Moses is leader. Moses also said to Korah, verse 8, now listen, you Levites, Isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work of the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself, but now you're trying to get the priesthood too? You see, only the family of Aaron could be priest, but all of the Levites served God in the holy service in the tabernacle. But that wasn't enough for them to serve God. They wanted to have the place of honor. Verse 11. It is against the Lord that you and all of your followers have banded together. Who is Aaron that you should grumble against him? Pointing to Aaron, I'm sure, there beside him. You mean this is the guy you're jealous of? My brother? Who is he? Then Moses summoned Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. But they said, we will not come. Isn't it enough that you have brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in this desert? They're always wanting to go back to Egypt. They want to be fed. They've forgotten they had to work from daylight to dark, 7 days a week, to get that little bit of flesh in their flesh pot and that little bit of honey on their bread. All they can remember is, all they can look at is, they don't have flesh, don't have the flesh pot, and they don't have the honey out here in the wilderness. Is it enough you brought us out here to kill us, they say? Now you want to lord it over us? Moreover, you haven't brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey, or to give us, you haven't given us inheritance of field and vineyards. Will you gouge out the eyes of these men? Or they ought to read probably, will you make slaves of these men? No, we will not come. Moses had given them a land flowing with milk and honey. They just refused to take it. You know, it's one thing to be given a land. It's another thing to receive it, to take it. Moses had given them, brought them to a land flowing with milk and honey. And all they had to do was have the faith to go get it. They didn't have that faith. Look at verse 15. Then Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, do not accept their offering. I have not taken so much as a donkey from them, nor have I wronged any of them. Moses said to Korah, you and all your followers are appear before the Lord tomorrow, you and they and Aaron. Each man will take his censer and put incense in it, 250-inch censers in all, and present it before the Lord. Each man took his censer, put fire in it, and stood with Moses and Aaron at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Look at verse 20. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, separate yourself from this assembly so I can put an end to them. He said, I'll kill them, get out of the way. But Moses and Aaron said, oh God, God of the spirits of mankind, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins? So he pleads, they plead for the assembly. All the assembly of Israel will have died, except Moses and Aaron had pled. The Lord said to Moses, say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. They got up, and they moved away. Verse 28, then Moses said, this is how you'll know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and it's not my idea. If these men, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, die a natural death and experience only what is usually happens to man, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive to the grave, then you'll know these men have treated the Lord with contempt. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground opened its mouth and swallowed up Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and with them 14,700 other men. As God spoke very clearly that Moses and Aaron were his leader. If you read in verse 49 with me, it said 14,700 died from the plague, in addition to those who died because of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of the meeting, for the plague had stopped. God doesn't want Moses and Aaron's authority to be questioned, because they are leading the people in a time of rebellion, in a time of disobedience, when the leadership is even more essential than it is in a time of peace and prosperity. Korah, Dathan, Abiram owned 250 Levites, 14,700 of the people are cut off and die, so that Moses and Aaron's leadership will be recognized as leading these people toward promised land. Sometimes we have trouble with the Lord killing 14,700 people. Know one of two things. Know either that those people deserve to die, or know that God was delivering them from the evil environment in which they were in and bringing them home. In one case, it's judgment because of sins committed. In the other case, it's deliverance because of righteousness honored. They'll die anyway, because they have to die before the people of God can enter promised land, because they've rejected God at Kadesh Barnea. The next thing that happens during these 12 unknown stations of wandering is the proof of priesthood. In chapter 17 of the book of Numbers, the Lord wants to stop these people's grumbling about Aaron. So he says in verse 5, "The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I'll rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites." Now, a staff is a dead stick, but this dead stick without any root in soil is going to bud and sprout and bud to prove that Aaron is the priest. When that happened, the Israelites said to Moses in verse 12, "We're lost, we will die, we're lost. Everyone even comes near to the tent of the tabernacle of the Lord will die, or we're all going to die." And so God makes it very, very plain that only Aaron can enter the Holy of Holies. Only his sons can enter the holy place. And the people say, it was as at the mount. It was as at the mount. If we touch the mount, we'll die. If we come near to the tent of the tabernacle, we will die. The fourth thing that occurs during this period of wandering is the Levites' support. And you'll read that in chapter 18. The duties are given, but also they are to receive 1/10 of the tenth. The tenth of all that goes to God, is all that the Jews give goes to support the Levites. And Aaron's family receives the tenth of the tenth. The tenth supports the Levites. The Levites' tenth supports Aaron and his family. And then 19, in chapter 19, the fifth thing in this period of 12 unknown stations is the Day of Atonement is ordered and detailed and predicted. The Day of Atonement is a day that they are to bring a sacrifice, the sacrifice of the year unto God. And it is to be offered on the altar, and their sins are to be remembered when they do that. They are to be remembering the fact that they are sinful. But that Day of Atonement is to keep them, in spite of their sin, in fellowship with God. As they offer the sacrifice, God honors their sacrifice and says, "These people are in fellowship with me." So during this period of wandering, God's not just letting them alone. It is not as if God is ignoring them. He's giving them ordinance for worship. He's correcting their push to have the authority that belongs only to Moses and to Aaron. He is establishing the house of Aaron as the priestly family. He is providing for the support of Levi and Aaron's house. And he's giving them the great day which they can offer a sacrifice that God will accept as their work of faith and keep them in fellowship with him on a national basis. The Day of Atonement was not so that the individual would be in fellowship with God. That's his personal faith. The Day of Atonement was so that the nation could continue in fellowship with God and not wander into the sin that they did at the foot of the mountain when they made the golden calf. And we're moving toward, in the case of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and they would move that way if they did not have a constant worship and a yearly reminder of the fact that they needed God, not only for their physical needs, but also for the spiritual forgiveness of sin. The 15th station on this Exodus is Mount Hor, a city there called Massarah. And here it is that God says the wandering is over. You have fulfilled the need to be outside of promised land. All of the generation that had left Egypt 20 years and up is dead, except for Aaron, and he'll die right here, and except for Moses, and he'll die soon, and except for Joshua and Caleb, and they get to enter the land. The rest of them have died. A new generation has arisen. It is time to enter Promised Land. Here at Masera, on the top of Mount Hor, Aaron dies. The first high priest of Israel, the right hand of Moses, the spokesman for Moses, who was the spokesman for God, is now dead. And so another generation is to continue. And that really is sort of like when they left the Garden of Eden. The leaders must die before the people that are going to be the leaders will arise. Very quickly, 3 quick stations happen, and it's just a wandering around as they pick up the people that have stopped in various places. They go to Ezion Geber, Kadesh Barnea, back to Ezion Geber, and that's all in Numbers chapter 33 and in Numbers chapter 20. One thing, just gathering the people. You know what would happen during a time of wandering? One group would stop to feed their sheep here, and another group would stop to feed their sheep there. And now all the people must cross Jordan and go into the land that God has promised to Abraham. So they gather at Elath. Elath and Ezion Geber are sister cities, one beside the other, at the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba. It is a copper mining place. Later, Solomon's copper mines will be found here. At Elath, the people do what they have been doing from the very beginning of their time with God. And you read of this in Numbers chapter 21, starting with verse 4. The people murmur against God. And so God sends fiery serpents to strike the people. And hundreds and thousands of them begin to die. And they appeal to Moses, and Moses appeals to God. And God says, okay, erect a serpent, a brass serpent. And there I will save the people. Anybody who looks upon this brass serpent will be healed. Now, it wasn't the serpent that healed them. It wasn't really even the looking that healed them. The writer of Hebrews makes it plain. It was the faith that caused them to look that healed them. God is always saved by faith. But it is a faith that does what God says, that does all that God says, and does it because God said it. So the brass serpent is just a piece of brass. But they're to look, as a matter of fact, he erected 2. They are to look at that brass serpent, and then the looking will live. And as soon as they looked, they did not die. This became a superstition to the people, as I could understand. They thought, boy, that serpent's something else. We need to carry that with us. So they put that piece of brass in the Ark of the Covenant that was in the most holy place, where all that was supposed to be there was that Ark of the Covenant, and inside of it the 2 tablets upon which Moses had rewritten the 10 Commandments after he'd broken the original edition that God had written. That's all that's supposed to be there. Just God's Ark, God's law, and God's man is to go there once a year to meet God. But they put this piece of brass there, and it'll stay there until Hezekiah, the king of Judah's day. It is amazing how superstitious people can be, even when they have the revelation of God. Now I want us to be turning over the book of Deuteronomy in the conclusion of our lesson today, and think about what this book is about, and get to chapters 28, 29, and 30, and look at an additional covenant that God makes with Israel besides the covenant made at Sinai. The word Deuteronomy comes from 2 Greek words, deuteros, which means second, and nomos, which means law. So this is the second law, not literally a second law, but this is the law as it is repeated. And that's basically what the book of Deuteronomy is. I want you to read that book. Of course, we don't have time in this lesson to read the whole book of Deuteronomy, but I really want you to read that book. I want you to pay attention that this time when he gives the law, he often gives the reason for that law. It is as if, and it is as in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus will talk about a law or a principle or an edict, but then he'll tell them the thing behind that law. That's what Deuteronomy does that Exodus does not do. For instance, when he's repeating the 10 Commandments in chapter 4, when he gets to the one that says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, he doesn't simply say that. He tells them why. He says, you'll do that to remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and God delivered you by a mighty and a powerful hand. So they had the Passover to remember it yearly, and they had the Sabbath day to remember it weekly. That they were under obligation to God, that they need to give praise and glory to Him for His work in delivering them out of the tragedy of Egypt, out of the bondage there. Isn't God gracious to give us reminders of what of our deliverance and of His power? We have one, as we mentioned earlier, every Lord's Day. When we eat the bread and drink the fruit of the vine, we are declaring His death until He comes. We're remembering that He died for us. We're remembering, honoring God for His great deed and the great power that He bestows and bestowed in our life. But then after that whole law is given, God gives a new covenant, an additional covenant to Israel, besides the covenant He gave at Sinai. And I want you to look at that briefly with me. In Deuteronomy 28, 29, and 30. In days to come, when we start studying the Hebrew nation, we're going to look back to these 3 chapters again and again and again. Because this is the basis. Here we find the way that God has promised to deal with His people. Look at 28, beginning with verse 1. He said, if you truly obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all His commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you on high above all the nations. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord. Notice the ifs there. If you obey the Lord. He says you'll be blessed in the city, you'll be blessed in the country. He says the fruit of your womb will be blessed, the crops will be blessed, the livestock, the calves, the lambs will be blessed, your basket, kneading trough will be blessed. You'll be blessed when you come in, you'll be blessed when you go out. If your enemies rise against you, they'll come at you in one direction but flee in 7. I'll give you blessings in the barn. I'll establish you as a holy people. All the peoples of the earth will see that you're called by the name of God. The Lord will grant you abundant prosperity in the womb, in the livestock, and in the crops, in the land that I swore to give to your forefathers. I'll open the heavens. I'll pour out the rain upon you. I'll make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commandments of God, your God will give you this day and follow them. You'll always be at the top, never at the bottom. Do not turn aside from any of these commandments I give you today to the right or the left, following other gods and serving them. They'll be blessed in every way. But then in the rest of 28, he says, however, if you do not do that, if you disobey, I'll curse you. And then I don't need to read this. He just says, I'll curse you in every way I promise to bless you. Curse you when you go out, curse you when you come in, curse the fruit of the womb, curse the land, curse everything, and I'll put you in captivity. I will take you away from the land where you are and will scatter you. That's verse 64 of 28. I will scatter you among all the nations. I will give you an anxious mind. I'll give you eyes weary with longing. I'll give you a despairing heart. You'll be in constant suspense. In the evening, you'll wish it was morning. In the morning, you'll wish it was evening. And you wish I'd send you back to Egypt in ships. Your males will be for sale. Your females will become other people's wives. Nobody will buy you. Said, I'll make you so cursed, nobody will buy you. But he says, if there, chapter 29 and 30, if there you remember me according to the law and repent and turn and do my will, then I'll bring you back from that captivity and bless you again in this land. That covenant will govern all that happens to Israel from this time forward. When they are obedient, they're blessed. When they're not, they're cursed. That's the covenant of blessing and cursing. And we'll talk about it many times in future studies. Turn to the last chapter of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 34. Moses dies. He climbs to the top of Pisgah, looks upon the promised land, doesn't get to enter, but he gets to see it. He'll enter it later on the Mount of Transfiguration when he stands there with Jesus. But he doesn't get to enter it as long as he lives. And in verse 5, and Moses the servant of the Lord died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him. The Lord buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died. Yet his eye was not weak, nor his strength gone. Why did he die then? He got his work done. It's time for Joshua to serve. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Watch Moses' epitaph. Since then, no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and all of his officials, to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all of Israel. The number one man that Israel ever had was this man, Moses. But Joshua is now the leader of Israel. One more lesson, and we'll be through with the story of the history of the Hebrew family.